The Holy Gospel, according to Matthew, the 13th chapter. Jesus put before the crowds another parable. The kingdom of heaven may be compared to someone who sowed good seed in his field. But while everybody was asleep, an enemy came and sowed weeds among the wheat and then went away. So when the plants came up and bore grain, then the weeds appeared as well. And the slaves of the householder came and said to him, "Master, did you not sow good seed in your field? Where then did these weeds come from?" He answered, "An enemy has done this." The slave said to him, "Then do you want us to go and gather them?" But he replied, "No, for in gathering the weeds you would uproot the wheat along with them. Let both of them grow together until the harvest. And at harvest time I will tell the reapers, 'Collect the weeds first and bind them in bundles to be burned, but gather the wheat into my barn.'" Then Jesus left the crowds and went into the house. And his disciples approached him, saying, "Explain to us the parable of the weeds of the field." He answered, "The one who sows the good seed is the Son of Man. The field is the world, and the good seed are the children of the kingdom. The weeds are the children of the evil one, and the enemy who sowed them is the devil. The harvest is the end of the age, and the reapers are angels. Just as the weeds are collected and burned up with fire, so will it be at the end of the age. The Son of Man will send his angels, and they will collect out of his kingdom all causes of sin and all evildoers, and they will throw them into the furnace of fire, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Then the righteous will shine like the sun in the kingdom of their Father. Let anyone with ears listen." The Gospel of the Lord. May the words of my mouth and the meditation of my spirit be pleasing to you, O Lord, my rock and my redeemer. Amen. We all know that sometimes when our favorite books are made into movies, there are discrepancies. Some of our favorite scenes from our beloved books are changed or even left out altogether of the movie script. In the fourth book of the popular Harry Potter series, the Goblet of Fire has somehow selected Harry to participate in a tournament, despite the fact that Harry himself is not old enough to be eligible for the tournament and did not enter his name in the first place. Everyone is in an uproar about this, and no one believes Harry when he swears that he did not enter his name. In the midst of the general panic, the wise headmaster, Dumbledore, confronts Harry. In the book, it goes like this. "Did you put your name into the Goblet of Fire, Harry?" Dumbledore asked calmly. But in the movie, Dumbledore screams this line in anger. "Harry, did you put your name into the Goblet of Fire?" It does not seem like a large difference, but I'm sure that author J.K. Rowling was disappointed in the way that the movie changed Dumbledore's usually wise, calm demeanor into one where he snaps and loses his temper. I picture the wise householder in this parable to be like the calm Dumbledore from the book. While everyone else is panicking about the weeds that have appeared in the field, the householder is not concerned. He could have yelled at the farmhands and claimed that they did not do a good job planting the seeds or taking care of the field. He could have blamed and yelled at a neighbor who was trying to compete with him and sowed the weeds in an attempt to ruin his crops. He could have blamed the one he bought the seeds from, claiming that he was sold faulty seeds that produced weeds with his wheat. He could have lashed out in anger at the farmhands for even implying that the weeds are there because of the work that he did. But he does none of these things. He simply says, "An enemy has done this." The farmhands are not satisfied. They want to know if they should immediately go and remove the weeds. They want to fix the problem. They need an instant answer or solution. And they certainly do not want the whole neighborhood to see that their field has weeds in with the wheat. It might ruin their master's reputation. And even though they do not say this, I'm sure that they would not be human if they did not wish for their master to go and find the enemy who sowed the weeds in with the wheat, and demand some kind of apology or retribution, or even to seek revenge upon them. But once again, the householder is unconcerned. In his eyes, there is no need for instant action. And in fact, he sees how taking immediate action will cause even more harm. No, for in gathering the weeds, you would uproot the wheat along with them. Let both of them grow together until the harvest. If the wise householder is like the wise Dumbledore, we are often like the panicking farmhands, eager to get the weeds out of our lives and to lash out at whoever put them there. The attitude of the farmhands is one that has been a part of the life of Christians for a very long time. Despite this parable claiming that the weeds and the wheat should grow together until the harvest, Christians have often felt that we must somehow wall ourselves off from the weeds of the rest of society. Like many things, it began in a way that was well-intentioned. During the Middle Ages, some Christians felt that they experienced God calling them to live a different kind of life than the rest of society. Soon, these Christians were joining together in various monastic orders. They lived together in monasteries, they wore the same types of clothes, they ate the same food, they gave up all of their worldly possessions, and they worshiped and prayed together. These faithful men and women have provided us much in the way of spiritual encouragement. They wrote important documents about God that continue to benefit us. They wrote prayers and experimented with different worship practices that are still in use today. They modeled what Christian communities ought to look like. They also provided society as a whole with art, literature, and even discoveries in agriculture, science, and math. Various monasteries and convents still exist today, with their orders still going strong and their faithful members still encouraging us by their examples. In light of these important contributions, I would never wish to bash the idea of monastic orders or the people who feel called to such a life. However, I do think that when we look back on our Christian history, we tend to idealize the monastic lifestyle. We think that their sole reason for separating themselves off from society was to avoid weeds, and that these communities were and are perfect. Instead of being encouraged by their faith, we strive after their lifestyle in a way that they did not intend, and that neither we nor they could attain. Not many of us today feel called to the monastic life, but the idea that Christians must be separate in some way from society and that Christian communities are better than non-Christian communities is very prevalent. Some churches and denominations encourage or even require their members to separate themselves from people outside of their church or from certain aspects of secular life. Even within our own Lutheran tradition, we can get overly focused on building up our own communities, saving our own buildings, adhering to specific social and cultural traditions outside of worship, such as potlucks that we perceive to be Lutheran. And subconsciously, we exclude others who are not like us or who do not come from our Lutheran background. Churches can be hesitant to embrace aspects of culture and new technologies because they see them as weeds, thus alienating themselves from people and stunting their growth. All of this comes from a separating the weeds from the wheat mentality, which can become very harmful, especially when we start to use the standards and norms of our own communities to determine who is in with God and who is out. And of course, this understanding of that parable quickly breaks down when we realize that our Christian communities are far from perfect. No matter what we do, we cannot keep out the weeds. I'm sure that even those who lived in monasteries in the Middle Ages knew that they were not free from the problems of human sin, and Christian congregations today certainly are not. Pastors and other leaders act outside of their authority in harmful ways. Members fight amongst themselves. People act in passive-aggressive ways instead of working together to solve problems. We blame everyone but ourselves for our own wrongs, and we are still all affected by tragedies and things outside of our control. As we have watched the effects of the pandemic across the country and experienced them in our lives, we have seen how it has brought out the best and worst of people, both inside and outside the church. Even when we all have good intentions and want to do what is best, we are not always able to come to the same conclusions. And worse, we are not always able to disagree gracefully. Our best attempts to rid our lives of the weeds are unsuccessful because the weeds are not an outside entity that we can remove. For our congregation or any congregation to be empty of weeds, then we would also have to be empty of people. The weeds are inside of us. They are growing so closely within us that we cannot pull them out without uprooting our very selves. This parable must have made the disciples anxious because they asked Jesus about it, and so he explained it. Jesus promised the disciples that after the harvest, the weeds will be removed and the people of God will shine like the sun. In our uphill battle to remove our weeds, the advice of the householder becomes good news for us. Let both of them grow together until the harvest. Jesus knows that we cannot remove our weeds, and he reminds us that it is not our job to worry about weeds, our own or what we perceive to be weeds in someone else. Jesus himself, despite being without sin, became the weed that was pulled and thrown into the fire. But then Jesus rose again, proving that the weeds of sin no longer have the power to choke us or prevent us from growing close to God. We do not need to worry about the weeds because we have already been claimed for the harvest. God promises that in our baptisms. This parable is less than helpful if we think of the weeds and wheat as individual people, but that is likely not how Jesus intended it. Instead, we can think of the weeds and wheat as the parts of our own selves that seem to always waver between righteousness and sin. Our baptisms promise us that God's love will never be cut off from our lives. But our baptisms do not promise us that we will then live free from the effects of sin. Martin Luther said that we are at the same time saint and sinner. We are at the same time weeds and wheat. In Jesus' description of the end times to the disciples, he says that God will collect out of the kingdom all causes of sin. Suddenly, this troubling parable brings us good news of God's grace. Even though we will never rid ourselves of our weeds in this life, we are not destined to be gathered up and thrown out. We are promised that eventually God will remove the weeds for us and all things will be made new in God's kingdom, a place where we are free from our inner weeds. Until then, we are set free in light of this good news. We are set free from our struggle against the weeds of sin. We are set free to go out into the world, not separate ourselves off from it, and to see people, not as weeds or wheat, and to share this good news of God's surprising love. Amen.